Hello and welcome to another retro wrestling review. That's right, this is your wrestling expert here, Mr. Eric Ryder, and this week we're going to be looking back at Wrestlemania X, which took place, I believe it was March 20th, 1994 at Madison Square Garden in New York City. It was in front of 18,465 people in attendance, if I seem to remember. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was somewhere within that area. And this was one of the best WWE pay-per-views during its company's harder times. As you all know, this pay-per-view paved the way to the new generation in the WWF. And the new generation in the WWF lasted between 1994 well up until 1997, when the Attitude Era started to take form. During that time, the new generation wanted to make it a little more, Vince McMahon wanted to make the WWF a little more kid-friendly. He wanted to kind of watered down on the violence, wanted to sort of solidify stars to make them into more bigger stars, but also at the same time he also had very badly done caricatured wrestlers. You had garbage men, you had clowns, you had plumbers, you had hockey players, you had guys who were wearing masks, calling themselves who, and just making jokes out of them all. You didn't really have any real big-name stars at the time. Most of the characters were pretty much caricatured. Almost to the point of being cartoony-like. But they were trying to make things a little more PG and kid-friendly-like. And of course, this didn't really sit well in the WWF at the time. They had to kind of wait until around 3 years later when guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Triple H, and The Undertaker, well, The Undertaker was around during these whole ordeals. He's been through them all, through good times and bad. And, Vince McMahon still was kind of eyeing on the future. Well, in 1994... Well, actually, it may have even started way earlier. We probably might need to go back a little bit to the early 90s, around 1992, roughly, when Vince McMahon was trying to look for somebody who would eventually pass the torch, because I think the legacy of Hulk Hogan was starting to wane. After Hogan left the WWF in 1992, they take a short hiatus to do movies. And it was often questionable if whether or not Hulk Hogan would have came back in 93. Fortunately, he did. But his days in the WWF were actually clearly, obviously numbered. Vince was still kind of weighing in on the hopes that Hulk Hogan might return to WWF for the long haul, but it was pretty much clear that Hulk Hogan, by around 94, we knew that Hulk Hogan was a shoo-in for not returning to the WWF, and it would be a matter of months before Hulk Hogan would eventually sign up with WCW. I don't know the exact date was when he signed, but I do know it was drawing near. Vince McMahon still was looking for who would be the face to run the company in the WWF in its new generation phase. Vince was going through a lot during this period of time. Before Hulk Hogan's signature to WCW, Hulk Hogan, along with the Ultimate Warrior, Davey Boy Smith, I believe Tully Blanchard, and a few others, took Vince McMahon not to the wrestling ring, but to the courtrooms where he and Linda McMahon were being questioned about the steroid trial situations. So, I mean, this could have almost potentially sent the WWF on the brink of bankruptcy. But fortunately, that didn't happen. Vince McMahon was acquitted, and the WWF still continued to roll and still continued to run shows, whether it be on pay-per-views or Monday Night Raw or Saturday Night's Main Event, if that was still a thing going on at the time. But still, nonetheless, Vince McMahon was trying to find someone to fill in that void. While he was still definitely eyeing on Lex Luger to do the job, even though he hasn't quite given up yet on Lex Luger, the fans kind of seem to had gave up on him. Who could forget, I guess after Lex Luger failing to win the World Wrestling Federation Championship at SummerSlam 93 against Yokozuna, by only having Lex Luger only beat him by a countout. And of course, we all know that in a regular title match, a championship does not change hands on either a countout or a disqualification. It's either by a pinfall or a submission. So Luger, they were trying to package Luger, get it? Because, he's the total package. They were trying to, put him over, with the whole Lex Express, him and his cross-country tour to go all around the United States on the Lex Express, meeting people, signing autographs, interacting with people. We could clearly tell the guy was not really that organically comfortable with that. But he was trying to do his best to have Lex Luger fill the void. I mean, Vince McMahon eyed on Luger for obvious reasons. Number one, Luger was a big, muscular type of guy. Somebody that Vince McMahon often gravitates to. But to say Lex Luger just does not have the same level of charisma as the other muscly type guys that Vince likes. Somebody of a Hulk Hogan. Somebody of like a Randy Savage. Or an Ultimate Warrior. But while Vince was still eyeing on the big muscular Luger, the fans were actually gravitating towards Bret the Hitman Hart to lead the star as the big star of the company. Now, Bret Hart does not have the muscular physiques of a Hogan or a Savage or a Warrior or even a Luger type. Bret Hart was more of a working man's type of wrestler. And while Bret the Hitman Hart did work and training, he had some levels of muscularness, but he wasn't exactly, like the big, muscly type guy. He was more like a technical type of guy, a workhorse type of person. And, fans seemed to look like they were gravitating towards somebody of his caliber to be the face of the company. As fans were starting to become tired of big, muscly guys trying to pass the torch to. So therefore, at the Royal Rumble, Lex Luger and Bret the Hitman Hart made history of being co-winners of the Royal Rumble. And that has never happened since then. I mean, the closest we ever came to almost having that was in 2005 when both John Cena and Batista both fell over the top rope at the same time. And then, of course, you all know that funny story when Vince McMahon angrily stormed down the ring and accidentally tore his quad. Well, okay, maybe it wasn't really that funny, but when you look back at it, you could probably, even Vince himself would probably look back and laugh Even though, it wasn't funny. I mean, he actually did break his torso. And I think that kind of crippled him for life, unfortunately. But that kind of put him out as a wrestler. But still, that unfortunately, he wanted to continue the match. I guess he didn't want to see another Luger Hart situation where both John Cena and Batista were co-winners. I mean, it made kind of sense since Batista was on Raw and John Cena was on SmackDown. Now, so in this case, that since Luger and Hart were co-winners, maybe they should have. Now, I'm not exactly a big fan of triple threat matches, but I guess triple threat matches were not around in the WWF in 1994. I think they only came around maybe a couple years later. Now, I'm not usually a big fan of triple threat matches. I usually find them to be, kind of lazy bookings where, since we can't agree on one person to face a champion, why not put 2 or 3 or 4 other people against the champ? And we'll have a triple threat or a fatal 4-way. But no, instead they decide that Yokozuna will have 2 challengers to face the champion. Now, due to a coin toss, which Luger won, so therefore Luger had the honor to face Yokozuna first. And then Bret the Hitman Hart will face whoever is the champion in the main event. Now, because of this, both Luger and Bret were also given the options to face an opponent of their choosing. Lex Luger chose to face Crush if he wasn't going to win the coin toss. But Bret the Hitman Hart, well, he got to pick an opponent of his own choosing. So therefore, Bret the Hitman Hart decided that, hey, I want to get my revenge on my brother Owen. Of course, Bret and Owen were definitely on the opposite ends of the field. I mean, it all started, at the Survivor Series during the time when Shawn Michaels teamed up with Jerry Lawler's Kings. I believe Jerry the King Lawler was suspended from the WWF at the time because of allegations of him committing an act of pedophilia towards a little girl. Although, I don't know. That's not fully justified, but that's what I've heard. So he was granted a suspension. Lucky for him, he didn't get fired, but he was suspended due to this incident. So therefore, Shawn Michaels ended up teaming up with Jerry Lawler's Knights to take on the entire Hart family. And it consisted of brothers Bret, Owen, along with older brothers Bruce and Keith. And because Owen was the only one who got pinned during the whole ordeal, Owen took his hostilities on Bret. And then after a while, they reconciled. And, and then eventually they eventually would face the Quebecers at the 1994 Royal Rumble for the Tag Team Championship. Bret the Hitman Hart tweaked his knee, and therefore they called off the match as a no contest. Owen was obviously very livid, And so then he betrayed his brother Bret, started to work on his knee. As an act of revenge, Bret the Hitman Hart said, you know what? If Owen Hart wants to go for a fight, then I'll give him a fight. I'll give him a damn good fight. So therefore, Bret the Hitman Hart chose to wrestle his brother Owen Hart in the opening match. So here we go. WrestleMania 10 was set in New York City at Madison Square Garden to mark the 10th anniversary of the first WrestleMania. We had a quick package of some of the WrestleManias from the past, but they never really actually ever showed Hogan. Almost as though as if Hogan never existed. So it is pretty clear that Vince McMahon knew that Hogan was out of the company, since they didn't show any of Hogan's matches. Like WrestleMania 1, their feature was the Body Slam challenge between Andre and Big John Studd. WrestleMania 2, the Battle Royal. WrestleMania 3, Savage and Steamboat. WrestleMania 4, Savage winning the title in that single elimination tournament. WrestleMania 5, I don't remember that one, what they showed. And then WrestleMania 7, they showed the blindfold match. But for all it's worth, hey, this was a good way. I mean, WrestleMania 10 was set in New York City. WrestleMania 20, it's like every 10 years up until WrestleMania 30, that each WrestleMania was set at MSG. So we kick things off with Little Richard singing America the Beautiful, which was not bad, but I just don't understand why Little Richard kept going with the eat every time he said eat. I don't know why he's eat every time. Why he kept doing that. I don't know. Was there something wrong with his lungs? I'm not sure. I mean, he's still entertained, but it was actually the gospel themselves that were actually the ones that were in fine tune. So let's start off with the opening match. Of course, this was between Bret the Hitman Hart as he took on younger brother the Rocket, Owen Hart. And by God, Owen Hart, he was truly, he was different from all the other type of villain heels. I mean, he wasn't actually playing kind of like a caricatured, cartoony type villain. He was kind of playing, just an organically angry, jealous younger brother who was being sick and tired of, just being stuck in the shadows of his more successful brother Bret. Just because, he's the older brother. And he's still continuing to, hog my spotlight. And, this is also Vince McMahon's ways of just trying to, get the younger talent over. Owen Hart at the time was still, 28 years old. While Bret the Hitman Hart was pretty much in his mid to late 30s. So, they were trying to do everything they can possible to get younger stars going. And, Owen Hart was, still a very young man. But he was a veteran in this profession, He can't, just like his brother Bret, he started in the Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. He's wrestled also in Japan. He tried to wrestle for the NWA, but was of no success. He came to the WWF, as the Blue Blazer for a short while. And then he was placed in these other stupid gimmick type of tag teams. He was wearing those like parachute pants that he was wearing when he was teaming with Jim Neidhart when they were the New Foundation. That didn't do really justice for either any of them, for neither him or Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And then he teamed up with Coco Beware to form the team of High Energy. That also really didn't go anywhere. So now we're actually seeing Owen Hart trying to, make his way into becoming a big-time star. And I think this was the launching pad for what would become an explosive feud between the two brothers during the year. And I think they would even continue on even into next year as well. Owen Hart still continuing to be the villainous type heel. Bret Hart still the top babyface that everyone likes. Owen Hart also had those like sunglasses that Bret Hart likes to bring, but instead of putting it on a fan, he would just take the glasses and rip them. But one of the things that I liked about this match, or that I loved about this match, was that the brothers were just not going to end their rivalry through stiff kicks and punches. No. But by the moves that they've learned from their father Stu Hart's dungeon in Calgary. I don't think they were only just doing this, for the sake of having a long-going, bitter feud between Bret and Owen, but they also wanted to impress their father. I mean, they both still had love for their father, but they are still, but the match itself between them, we saw a combination of bitter rivalry mixed with technical skills from both guys. Some old school mat wrestling from both these two. A lot of great, technical stuff from each other. Owen definitely has a lot more energy and may probably be a little more aerial in his tactics, while Bret is more of a mat-skilled technician. Both of them seem to be well scouted in each other's moves, each of them knowing each other very well. And the match was definitely solid back and forth technical wrestling with some personal vendetta mixed in between the two. This match was really just generally a one-fall contest. There was nothing really on the line, except for Owen Hart with possible bragging rights, or even just a way just to put him over so that he could get a big push. There was, of course, the heated tension from both men was throughout, even though they both tried to wrestle technically. I guess many times they were trying to do like a bit of Savage and Steamboat thing with a lot of near counter stuff, but each of them were trying to escape the sharpshooter. A lot of good stuff that went on during this match. The climax came when Bret the Hitman Hart tried to go for a victory roll, but Owen reverses it to get the pin and the win. This is definitely a classic opening match to kick off, and perhaps this might be one of the best opening matches in wrestling history, or maybe just WrestleMania. Of course, Triple H would often like to say that it was between he and Daniel Bryan. But I think of that one as maybe, which was a good match, nothing against Triple H and Daniel Bryan, but Bret and Owen, still number one. Owen gets the victory win, and definitely 1994 was definitely the summer of Owen. And Owen Hart wins. Owen Hart has found his place in the WWF. I mean, it's just kind of sometimes saddened that, Owen Hart never got to become a world heavyweight champion. I think that maybe if he would have been still alive, he probably would have been a WWF champion. But it's just too bad that Owen never really ever reached the main event level yet. I think the guy was kind of like stuck in the mid-cards, winning, either tag titles, which he did with Yokozuna, and he also had a lengthy run as tag champions with Davey Boy Smith. And yeah, he also held singles titles like the European title, which he took a lot of great pride at holding, and also he had the Intercontinental title for a bit, but never was able to win the big prize. He's had many title shots with Bret, but that never really ever succeeded. Overall, a great match. Great opening match. Bret the Hitman Hart and Owen. Great match. I'm going to give this one a solid 10 out of 10. Alright, then we come to a next match we have is a mixed tag team match between Bam Bam Bigelow and his partner Luna Vachon, taking on the dynamic duo of Doink and his midget partner Dink. So I guess the two big wrestlers, Doink and Bam Bam, would be fighting against each other, whereas Dink and Luna Vachon would be facing each other, because what is a woman's strength the equivalent to the strength of a midget? To me, that kind of sounds a little borderline sexist. Or is it sizist? Is it prejudice against a woman? Prejudice against a midget? Or both? This match was mostly played for comic relief. But I will have to say there was some decent chemistry between Doink the Clown and Bam Bam Bigelow. I just kind of felt like maybe it would have been just better off if it was just a one-fall contest between Doink and Bam Bam. And you could maybe have Luna interfere at some point. That probably would have been something a little bit better. Sure, I loved the mind games that were being played between the clowns. The turning point came when Dink was knocked off the ring apron, and Bam Bam finished with a diving headbutt for the win. Mostly played for comedy, but it was kind of awkward at times. Wasn't there a part where Bam Bam and Luna decide to just become bullies and try to pull off sort of a WrestleMania 3 type of situation? You remember when King Kong Bundy started squashing midgets? Bam Bam wanted to try to kind of do sort of something similar to that. There was this awkward moment where Bam Bam wanted to put his almost like 400-pound girth on and just squash Dink. But instead, I think Luna got him instead, squashed him. Even though I don't think it was intended that way, but it was a botch. But it was pretty funny, even though it was not intended to be. It was mostly a comedy type of situation, but wasn't really played for laughs. And then up in the rafters, we had a visit from the President of the United States, or at least a reasonable facsimile. Boy, he looked dumb. I mean, everybody was all like pointing out, like, "Oh my God, it's the President!" When, of course, we all know that it wasn't actually the real president. It was just a guy dressed in a Bill Clinton look-alike. And I guess it was just supposed to be played for laughs, although I just found it stupid. Alright, next we had was a Falls Count Anywhere match between the Macho Man Randy Savage against Crush. Now, this was a little bit different than the traditional Falls Count Anywhere matches where, you beat your opponent anywhere you want in the building, and that's how you win the match. But this Falls Count Anywhere match had a bit of a twist. So not only do you pin your opponent, pinning your opponent isn't good enough. Your opponent has to return to the ring in 60 minutes. And if he makes it back in, the match must continue. But this match between Randy Savage and Crush, I don't know, this wasn't really that good. I would have loved to have seen Randy Savage has had some really great classic WrestleManias in the past. His match with Steamboat was great technical wrestling. His winning the world title by beating 4 opponents in one night was truly inspirational. He also had an excellent fight against Hogan in the main event at WrestleMania 5. And his mixed tag match 2 years ago at WrestleMania 6 between he and Sensational Sherry, or was he the Macho King, and Queen Sherry versus Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire. Sure, that was kind of played a little bit for comedy, but still, effective. And then WrestleMania 7, he fought a classic fight against the Ultimate Warrior where both guys were putting their careers on the line. And WrestleMania 8 between Randy Savage and Ric Flair, even though we were all disappointed that we didn't get our Hogan Flair pay-per-view payoff. But still, Savage and Flair still put on a great show with a lot of great story thing going with them. The story between why Crush and Randy Savage were fighting against each other was because, while Crush was out with an injury in a match against Yokozuna, Crush comes back. He's not as a bleached blonde. He sort of has now become, very upset and distraught that Randy Savage had was not there during visitations when he was while he was convalescing. Randy Savage didn't send him any cards or telegrams or even a visitation of anything. Feeling betrayed, Crush eventually turned heel. Started, wearing a bit of face paint, and would eventually turn his services over to Mr. Fuji. And Crush eventually became a villain heel at this point. So then they decided to have themselves a Falls Count Anywhere match with the twist that, the opponent not only have to pin your opponent, but your opponent has to return to the ring in 60 seconds. Definitely great brawling from both men, as Savage has always provided great entertainment. There was some weaponry that was used in the arsenal. Perfectly legal, because, there's no DQs in these type of situations. But still, this is inferior compared to other classic fights that Savage had over the years. Many times Crush may have looked down, but Mr. Fuji would help him along the way, or at least try to. Who could forget when Fuji had the Fuji salt that he was going to use? But that ended up being awkward. The ending of the match has Randy ramming Crush's head to the doors, pinning him, and then he ties his legs to a dangling cable so he won't get back in the ring in time for the win. I would say this match was not that great. Oh, I forgot to rate the Doink and Dink versus Bam Bam. That one, I think I'll probably give that one a 4 out of 10. This one gets a 3 out of 10, unfortunately. I mean, too bad this was actually Randy's last wrestling match with the company. I mean, he still was working for the company, but we could clearly tell that Vince McMahon was not going to pass the torch to Randy Savage. I mean, was this supposed to be Randy Savage's kind of send-off as an active wrestler? Because if so, I think that's kind of a little bit sad that it had to come down to that. I mean, I think what happened was that and this is just a rumor, okay? I'm not here to spread, falsified bullshit or whatnot. But I do think it had something to do with he and Stephanie McMahon, who was back in the early 90s, was still, very underage at the time. And I heard that he and Stephanie McMahon got into some kind of promiscuous relationship, which of course eventually ended up with he and Miss Elizabeth divorced. And this, of course, angered Vince McMahon to a point where Randy Savage was pretty much, just working through the rest of his contract, which Vince McMahon refused to sign once his contract expired. Randy Savage still wanted to continue to be an active fighter, but Vince said, no, your days are numbered, you're washed up. Randy Savage pretty much said, fuck it. So then he would eventually leave WWF, and later in '94, he would be ending up in WCW. And the thing is that many of these ex-WWF guys who would come back to WCW, he never returned. I mean, even after WCW folded in 2001, where did he go? He had a short stint with TNA Wrestling, and then he pretty much retired. I think the closest we've ever saw from Randy Savage and his involvement with WWE was, he was doing a commercial for Mattel with WWE wrestling figures in 2010. And then sadly in 2011, Randy Savage died suddenly at the age of 59 years old. Alright, next we had was a WWF Women's Championship match. And this was between Leilani Kai taking on Alundra Blaze during the WWF's effort to bring women's wrestling back to the company after it has been banished for many years. Alundra Blaze was going to become the face of the women's division, which he had. And, I gotta admit, Alundra Blaze or Medusa Michelli or Debbie Michelli, whatever you want to call her, Alundra Blaze, I've got to admit, she looked like $1 million. I mean, she was, this great athletic individual. Leilani Kai looked like she let herself go. I mean, the reason why Leilani Kai was there was because, 10 years ago in 1985, she took on Wendy Richter to face her for the WWF Women's Championship. But Alundra Blaze, she was a great technical wrestler as well as a great in-ring brawler. And we all know that Kai, she was just brought on for nostalgia purposes and nothing more. Alundra Blaze wins with a bridging German suplex, which was very well executed to retain the title. Not much to write about, but Alundra Blaze, she would continue to be like the trendsetter for the women's division into the new generation era. And then when she was still women's championship 2 years later, she gets a call to go to WCW. And then she does that infamous thing where she took the WWF Women's Championship and threw it in the garbage. I don't know if she was still using Alundra Blaze or if she was going by Medusa Michelli. There was still some more funny stuff, including the fake Bill Clinton, talking with IRS, saying that IRS is so happy that Mr. Clinton brought new taxes into the... It was stupid. We also saw some panelists of some wrestlers from the past sitting there too. Including, Moolah, Mae Young there. I bet you Moolah was like saying, I could have sold her. I mean, I'm just glad that Moolah was only just there for spectator reasons. Because let's face it, if you want to know, the fabulous Moolah, she was just a horrible human being. I mean, one of the reasons why she was a women's champion for 28 years wasn't because of anything inspiring or anything like that. No, she was a champion for 28 years because she wanted to make the company all about her. And she was pretty much pimping out on the female wrestlers she was facing. So whatever money they were making off of wrestling against her, they had to pay her back. She was just a horrible human being, I'm sorry to say. Next up we had was the WWF Tag Team title match on the line. There was Men on a Mission, which includes Mo, Mabel, and also, Oscar there too. And they took on Jacques Rougeau and Pierre-Carl Ouellet, the Quebecers. Let's face it, at the time, the Quebecers, they were the definitive tag team in the division at that time. Jacques Rougeau was still wearing his Mountie apparel. So is Pierre-Carl Ouellet, because of the fact that they're Canadians and they're Mounties. I've always thought that Jacques Rougeau and Pierre-Carl Ouellet had some pretty great in-ring chemistry. Jacques Rougeau was a great tag wrestler. He teamed with his brother Ramon during the rock and wrestling era. But he and Pierre-Carl Ouellet, they were pretty good. Pierre-Carl Ouellet, he was still a relatively young guy in the ring. Men on a Mission, Mabel, they were, he was in his early 20s. But to be honest with you, this was a pretty clunky, slow-paced match with some mild levels of entertainment from both teams, including, an interesting spot where Jacques Rougeau and Pierre-Carl Ouellet eventually released a double suplex on the near 500-pound Mabel. I did not like their ring apparel too much, especially Mabel. But after Mo and Mabel were starting to gain momentum against the Quebecers jumped out of Dodge and took a count-out loss to keep the championship. Men on a Mission still celebrated like they won the damn belts, but we could pretty clearly easily tell they were not going anywhere with anything. Alright, next we get the first of 2 WWF World Title matches, but before that actually took place, all of a sudden you see one of the celebrity guests at WrestleMania, because let's face it, WrestleMania is generally about celebrities. And the two celebrities that were there were, well, we had the host of a late night talk show on USA Network. Back when the USA Network was pretty risque in its content. And we had porn star Rhonda Shear hosting a show called Up All Night. Well, it wasn't like hardcore porn. It was mostly softcore stuff with lighthearted fetishes and things like that. I'm not going to go really into that much details because I don't really am interested in that and don't want to go to too much detail. But she hosted a show called Up All Night. And there was a time when, and during an interview with her, Shawn Michaels starts to get flirty. And then all of a sudden, a person who even though he was pretty much well into maybe middle-aged or even senior citizen, but he still was deemed one of the sexiest men alive. I'm talking Mr. Burt Reynolds. And if anybody who could try to outshine Shawn Michaels, it's Burt freaking Reynolds. Complete with a bad cast and all. He outshined Shawn Michaels and gave one hell of a great promo and a great pose. I mean, come on now. Even for his advanced age at the time, Burt Reynolds was still a sex symbol. And originally planned, Burt Reynolds was supposed to be doing the special guest ring announcer and to accompany Rhonda Shear to the ring for the first of the two world title matches. But instead, he was pulled to the main event, and so instead, Rhonda Shear was accompanied by the much younger, but still, the much younger, but still quite appealing and charismatic, one of the guys from New Kids on the Block. I'm talking about the one who isn't Mark Wahlberg. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, that's right. It was Donnie Wahlberg. I don't think Mark Wahlberg was yet to become a major Hollywood star yet. I mean, sure, he would later on with movies like Boogie Nights, which solidified his position in the Hollywood industry. But at the time, he was still, Marky Mark, the underwear guy. Whereas, I mean, when Donnie Wahlberg came to the ring, of course he was getting a chorus of boos, which is kind of surprising, but I guess it's probably just, nothing personal against Wahlberg, but because of the fact that the New Kids on the Block are from Boston, Baston. No, I'm just kidding. That's my poor attempt at a Boston accent. Anyhow, yeah. I believe he was also splitting from the group and was also thinking of trying his hand at Hollywood. So we had New Kid on the Block member Donnie Wahlberg doing the guest ring announcer, and Up All Night host Rhonda Shear as the timekeeper. And the special guest referee was Mr. Perfect, who, if all was missing, was just a cat burglar mask and a pork pie hat, and voila, Mr. Perfect would be coming to the ring dressed as the Hamburglar. I mean, he was complete in black and white stripes. Like I said, pork pie hat and a cat burglar mask, and he would be the Hamburglar. I almost felt like saying, "Robble, robble," because actually that was Hamburglar's catchphrase. Anyhow, so Yokozuna would be defending the World Wrestling Federation Championship against Lex Luger, And of course, whoever wins the match wins the title and will face Bret at the main event. Hoping for a better match that they had at SummerSlam 93. There was some great back and forth action between the two. I mean, I could clearly see that. I don't know if you noticed. Maybe you guys didn't. And maybe I would be ashamed to give away spoiler alerts in case people didn't see WrestleMania 10. Even though I'm assuming that people may have saw it. If they didn't, too bad. Anyhow, no, I'm just kidding. But I saw a look of sadness and disparity in Lex Luger when he was greeting the fans, giving high fives to them. I mean, he was trying to keep his composure, but he looked disappointed. This kind of gave me that kind of indication that he's not going to win. He probably knew maybe around near the last second that Vince McMahon pulled a plug on him. And he only knew like maybe a few days later. Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that their match at SummerSlam 93 was bad. There was a lot of great energy going into it. There was a lot of atmosphere. And there was some great back and forth action between these two. Luger, surprisingly enough, can move around very well for a man at 6'6", 275. And there were several near falls between the two. But the fans definitely were not as hyped up as they were about this match compared to SummerSlam 93 when these two faced off. I mean, Luger tries to ensure the victory with the bionic elbow. This time at least, Yokozuna didn't fall out of the ring to get himself counted out. And just as he was about to pin Yokozuna, Mr. Perfect refuses the count of 3 and instead tries to ward off both managers Jim Cornette and Mr. Fuji and tried to have them ejected. Luger confronts Mr. Perfect, but then accidentally touches Mr. Perfect and Mr. Perfect disqualifies him because, as a general rule, wrestlers are not allowed to put their hands on the referee. Mr. Perfect made the perfect decision. Luger got disqualified. Yokozuna keeps the belt. And Yokozuna's night is not over yet, as he faces Bret the Hitman Hart later on. Now, a lot of people are wondering, where did this whole vendetta with Mr. Perfect and Lex Luger began? Well, maybe we should go back about a year later at WrestleMania 9, when Mr. Perfect, who was at the time a babyface, took on Lex Luger, who was a heel. You may remember, before he became Mr. USA, Lex Luger, he was going as the narcissist. And he was using his metal plate for the victory win. Because you see, he had a steel plate in his elbow. He used that to knock out Mr. Perfect for the victory win. So I guess Perfect decided to get some revenge on Luger. They had a bit of a shouting match in the back. And, they just didn't do much for a possible feud because I think Perfect would be out of the WWF shortly. And, of course, Luger's star quality in the WWF would diminish, which is a sad thing. I mean, sure, they could have done some other things for Luger, or maybe even somewhere down the line could have had a possible Luger title run. Maybe not a lengthy one, but at least something that could be in the books for him. I mean, sure, he had much more success during his return to WCW in '95, where he would finally get his moment of glory when he defeated Hulk Hogan on an episode of Monday Nitro to win the WCW World Championship. I mean, Luger was an established star before WWF before coming to WWF in '92. Well, he didn't officially sign with WWF right away. I mean, he was part of a failed project that Vince McMahon had outside of the WWF called the WBF, which could have been just simply called WBS because it was utter bullshit. But during his time in the mid '80s up until 1992, Lex Luger had a pretty good run in WCW, winning all the major titles there, including, filling in the void after Ric Flair left NWA/WCW due to his feud with personal feud, not in-ring feud with Jim Herd, which eventually led to Flair just either getting fired from the company or just leaving the company. And Luger just pretty much filled in the void. And he had a pretty lengthy title run as WCW World Champion from July of '91 up until Super Clash '92. So, let's not completely, underrate or overrate Luger. So then next we had was a match between Earthquake versus Adam Bomb. Now, prior to the match, manager of Adam Bomb, Harvey Whippleman, started taunting Howard Finkel. Oh yeah, because another special guest I forgot to mention was, the Hair Club for Men guy was there, and here we had Howard Finkel with a toupee, and Harvey Whippleman just took the time to just taunt Howard Finkel with his toupee. And then Earthquake just defeated Adam Bomb in like 35 seconds, just doing a belly-to-belly suplex, a vertical splash, and that was it. I don't know who Brian Clark / Adam Bomb did to piss off Vince McMahon or anything. I actually thought Adam Bomb was an interesting character. I mean, he was a guy who claims that is some kind of genetic freak from a nuclear power plant malfunction, and now all of a sudden he's this, I don't know, he kind of like had a bit of that super villain type persona with him. As an in-ring competitor, for a guy who was 6'7" and weighed almost 300 pounds, he was pretty agile. He was pretty agile for a very big man. But it was just kind of too bad that the WWF wasted this talented guy. I mean, he was also pretty over. Even though the guy was clearly a villainous type heel, a villainy type heel, Maybe because they thought he was too much of a caricature type cartoony character. But I thought he was interesting. He had goggles, he had a red tongue. He easily looked like this kind of superhero villain type. I mean, they could have done something special for him, but no. He had the next time I ever saw him was in WCW in the late 90s. He went by another name called Wrath. And he teamed up with Chris Kanyon, who was back then called Mortis. And then he dumped the Wrath character and became just Brian Clark. And he teamed up with Crush, who was now just going by Bryan Adams, not to be confused with the Canadian rock legend Bryan Adams. Bryan Adams, the Canadian guy, the Canadian rocker was spelled Bryan, whereas the wrestler Bryan Adams is spelled Brian. And they had a tag team combination known as Chronic. Yeah. They would resurface in WWF, especially during the whole invasion angle. And they brought the WCW Tag Team Champions to the WWF, and they had a feud with the Brothers of Destruction. And they would exchange tag titles with them. But it was clearly easy that Undertaker and Kane were still superior to Bryan Adams and Brian Clark. I think Bryan Adams has retired from wrestling since then, but I'm talking too much about this. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just psyching myself up for the next match. Next, we had a classic battle for the WWF Intercontinental Championship. We had Razor Ramon, the real Intercontinental Champion, taking on the fake Intercontinental Championship, Shawn Michaels, in a ladder match where you must climb the ladder to retrieve the titles. You know, whether it be the real champion or the fake title. Now the story goes like this. Shawn Michaels was suspended by then Commissioner Jack Tunney because of the fact of his failure to commit to defending the title. Oh, jeez, if only Jack Tunney was around today, Shinsuke Nakamura would not get away with what he's doing. Back then, the Intercontinental Champion was actually treated like a mid-card title should, a working person's title, a title that would be defended on a regular basis and not just used as a prop like the way Shinsuke Nakamura is using the belt. Yeah, so Shawn was suspended of that. Of course, in real life, I believe he failed a fitness policy test, which resulted in a 60-day suspension. And I believe he also had some contractual disputes with Vince, and was almost this close to signing with WCW. But fortunately, they worked and settled an agreement, and Shawn was back in the company. But he was still claims to be the real Intercontinental Champion because Razor Ramon never beat him for it. Razor Ramon and Rick Martel were co-winners in a battle royal. So then the next week on Raw, Razor Ramon would go on to defeat Rick the Model Martel, and Razor Ramon would become the Intercontinental Champion. This match was easily what brought the ladder match into the into, this was the first ever ladder match seen in a pay-per-view. Now, they've done ladder matches in Stampede Wrestling back in the early 70s between Dangerous Dan Crawford and I believe it was Sweet Daddy Siki. They fought in the very first ladder match in Calgary. And since then, the ladder match had become kind of a bit of an afterthought until 1992 at a house show. Bret the Hitman Hart took on Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental Championship in a house show. This was back, when Shawn was still breaking out as a single star in the WWF. Bret, the experienced veteran. And they fought a great match against each other back then, and Bret Hart won. Now, the reason why the fans kind of fell into silence in this match, not because they were bored, but because they just were expecting the unexpected. Like, what are they going to do with this ladder? I mean, we have two great competitors of different styles. Razor, he was the big, burly, brawly kind of guy. Shawn Michaels, the more smaller, more lighter, agile, high-flying type. And how are they going to use the ladder to their advantage? Ramon, of course, would definitely more like use it for a power game, while Shawn Michaels would use it as some extra leverage to his incredible arsenal of high-flying moves. Shawn was actually the dominant one in the match, pretty much. But it's not to say that Razor was just a lazy slouch about it. Like I said, they used it to their advantages. We saw some great highlights, including Shawn Michaels doing a big splash off of it. And now this was kind of different than all the other ladder matches since then, where you would have like millions of ladders surrounding the ring. This one only had one ladder, and I was afraid about, they really should have a spare one in case this one gets fucked up, which it does, which often makes me wonder, like, how are they going to get the titles if the ladder is like that? I mean, this was pretty amazing stuff. I mean, the ladder match has become kind of a bit of a staple in the WWF. And it was used for, it could be used, with multiple people. I mean, they've used that in many Wrestlemanias. It could be used for table ladders and chairs matches. And also, it's synonymous with Money in the Bank, which is usually a big pay-per-view that comes around during the summer which usually comes around the year where, a guy or a girl fight in these kind of ladder matches with multiple people trying to go for the belt. Well, no, they don't go for a title. They actually go for a contract where they can cash it in at any time they want. There was a lot of close attempts from both men. The turning point was when Shawn was trying to do some move, but then he accidentally gets his foot caught between the ropes. Razor climbs up, grabs both belts for the win. This was a groundbreaking classic that definitely made the ladder match a staple gimmick in wrestling. And then finally we come to our main event. It is for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, the second world title match defended in this night. We had Bret the Hitman Hart versus Yokozuna. As you all know, both men seemed both very much out of it. Bret Hart still, tuckered out after his long, grueling 25-minute match with his brother Owen. Still selling that sore leg. Yokozuna still looks like he's spaced out after getting knocked out with the steel plate that Luger had. So then you had screen legend Burt Reynolds, escorting special guest ring announcer and star of Beverly Hills 90210, Jenny Garth. She was the timekeeper. We never really see much to her because it really actually goes to show you that Jenny Garth showed really lack of any interest of wanting to be there. She was only just there to collect some Wrestlemania money, do the timekeeping, and be done with it. She also kind of looked bored or disinterested. Well, Burt Reynolds, Rhonda Shear, they look like they were having the time of their lives. Except that Burt Reynolds was very bad at giving out the match. And just like the Luger and Yoko match, this match too would have a special guest referee. And it would be the legendary Rowdy Piper. And of course, we pretty much know that this was going to be in Bret's favor because Piper and Bret, are cousins. So, yes, a lot of people didn't know that. Bret still looks groggy after his match with Owen, and he sells it very well. Yoko looks naturally tired from his match. But many people sometimes tend to overlook the fact that Yoko actually put 25 minutes of his time fighting 2 matches in one night. Like I said, if this was today, we probably would have had a fatal 4-way match. We would have probably just shoehorned Owen Hart into the match. We would have had a fatal 4-way match with Yoko defending against Bret, Owen, and Luger. If this was today, hey, let's give. If this, we would not just have Owen have a 1-fall match and then just walk away with just bragging rights and then just having everybody forget about it. No. The match itself wasn't really that great. Even though, both tried to put on a good match. Yoko still looked like he could deliver. Bret and Yoko still had some good chemistry. But it was pretty clear that Yoko really just couldn't do it anymore. His weight and his composure was waning. Bret Hart, he was pretty much capable of fighting 2 matches in one night or 3 matches in one night. Because Bret Hart had that kind of ability. Now Yoko, of course, he may have been the younger of the 2, but he was also the less healthy of the 2. For, obvious reasons. I'm not fat shaming. Yoko actually was pretty decent in the ring. He can move around very well for a giant. But the turning point ended when Yoko, who looks like he was ready to do the bonsai drop, he eventually loses his balance, slipped off the ropes. Bret pins Yoko to win the title. And, then we had Lex Luger coming down the ring. At first when I saw Lex Luger coming down the ring, at first I thought this could have been a perfect opportunity for Lex Luger to turn heel. I could have saw potential heel turn for Luger. But instead, Luger eventually just shows sportsmanship. When I think he could have just easily clocked Bret with the steel plate. I don't know if he was going to go back as the narcissist Or even just call himself the total package. But we could clearly tell he was there, you know. All the other baby faces were there. Randy Savage. I saw the 1-2-3 Kid. I saw Tatanka. I saw Bob Sparkplug Holly. Few others. And they were all like hoisting Bret on their shoulder in victory. And then you come to and we see Owen Hart, you know, looking on in utter disgust. Randy Savage is inviting him like, come in, celebrate, your brother. Owen is like, no. How come I don't get a victory celebration? I beat Bret. This was supposed to be my moment. And once again, Bret stole it from me. You overrated, fucking asshole. You overrated, fucking asshole. You stole it from me. This was supposed to be my moment. Well, enjoy your little celebration. Because I'm coming after you. And I'm going to take the WWF Championship off of your waist, Bret. And I guess this kind of ends the night. So what did I actually think of this pay-per-view? I really gotta say it was one of the better ones during this whole difficult times that the WWF had at the time. A lot of great matches. I mean, there was really only two that really stood out, and that was Bret the Hitman Hart and Owen, and the ladder match. The others were not really that good. There was a lot of filler, but it was still entertaining, and I still recommend seeing it. The atmosphere was really good, and I guess it was kind of like the good condiments between two pieces of stale bread, which was WrestleMania 9, which was just some big fucking toga party, and WrestleMania 11, which was nothing more than just a bore fest. So with all that's said and done, if I was to give a scale out of 10, I would give WrestleMania 10 a 9 out of 10. It was a great pay-per-view. So I guess this ends my retro wrestling review. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you want to send a comment, go right ahead. You want to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. But just try to your best to be kind and courteous and don't be rude. And I'll be back again. So until next time, this is Eric Cartwriter saying, have a great day, you all. And I'll see you around. Goodbye.